invite our next speaker, Dr. Sushma Tejwani, to present her case. Amit, can you share the slides?
Yeah. Dr. Sonu is going to introduce Dr. Sushma.
Yeah, Dr. Sonu has asked me to do that. He's gone because of some webinar. Yeah, Dr. Sushma Tejwani, she did her fellowship in comprehensive ophthalmology at LV Prasad Eye Institute, and she worked as consultant at LVPI between 2003 to 2007. She underwent training for glaucoma at Mayo Clinic, Rochester, USA with Dr. Arthur Sett in 2007, and she has also completed level 1 and 2 of trabectome training at Vincent's Hospital. She is also a PhD scholar from VIT University, and she is presently working as consultant. Over to you, Dr. Sushma. Dr. Sushma, you are muted.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Bhalla. Well, I must thank Amit, Dr. Bhalla, and AIOS committee for giving me this opportunity. I'm just going to share a story of a young child. My slides are visible?
Yeah, your slides are visible and you're audible, Sushma.
Right. So this is a 15-day-old child that was presented with white discoloration of eyes since birth, a typical case of congenital glaucoma, both eyes. The child had a history, had an elder sibling who had also had bilateral congenital glaucoma and underwent trab and trap both eyes and did well. So this patient, obviously, this child underwent trabeculectomy and trabeculotomy in both eyes under GA. I'll tell you the story over next few years, what happened. So incidentally, the right eye did well, but the left eye, the pressure started increasing the next year itself. So that is when I operated this left eye, trabeculectomy and trabeculotomy again for persistent high IOP. So over next few years, that is from 2007 to 10, child did have high IOP in the left eye and initially managed on single anti-glaucoma medication. In between planned for surgery, but child could not undergo surgery because of the health issues. So we did a transscleral photocoagulation a couple of times. However, in 2011, I decided to do a AGV for this child in the left eye. And a routine AGV procedure was done. I think Dr. Manish has already shown the procedure, so I'll skip that. Well, from 2011 to 2016, next 5 years, the child did okay. He definitely had much higher myopia in the left eye to begin with after the first failed trap. The pressures were again going in the range of say 20s in 2016. So he was kept on single medication, but from June to November, the pressure started increasing more than 30. And I had to shift him on all three medication. He also started developing posterior subcapsular cataract. And as the eyeball was enlarging, the tube started shifting anteriorly, and he had a tube endothelial touch as well. So this is how the eye looked like. You can see the tube touching the cornea, and there was a localized corneal decompensation because child had the habit of rubbing the eye as well. So this was the fibrous tissue between the cornea and the tube, and you can see there was a touch on the endothelium. So this is how the bleb looked like, a very elevated fibrotic bleb around the plate that was large and diffuse. So this looked like a fibrous capsule. To confirm, I did a UBM by keeping the cup on this bleb, and you could see that there's a very thick fibrotic capsule around the valve body, and this is what it looked like. And there was a clear fluid space between the two. However, looking at such a thick fibrotic capsule, I knew that it is not going to work that way. So we decided to do the tube repositioning and excision of the fibrous capsule around AGV. And at the same sitting, I did a lens aspiration and PCIOL implantation also for him. So just a short clip to show you how this was done. After the cataract surgery, I closed the side ports, and then this was an area near the tube entry, which I'm opening so as to create a new track for the tube. So this is the new track for the tube so that it does not touch the endothelium that was adjacent to the previous tube position. So I removed the tube from the previous position. There were adhesions since it has been almost 5 or 6 years after the shunt procedure, but we could remove the tube and put it in the new track so as to take care of the tube endothelial touch. So the previous opening is what I was closing with that suture before inserting the tube into the new track. So this is the reinsertion of the tube into the anterior chamber. After that, I closed that part of the conjunctiva because I had to deal with the fibrotic capsule, which was far behind. So I created a new conjunctival incision over the elevation that we saw over the valve body. And there was a very thick capsule. You can see as I cut it, you can see the aqueous gush there. So it was quite a thick capsule, which I removed. And you can see the body of the valve from there. And just to check, I put some fluid from the anterior chamber, the tube, to see whether this valve is functioning. So I could see the fluid draining from the valve plate. So did the excision of the capsule and then closed the conjunctiva there. So that was the procedure. Now, over 1 year, the child did well, and the pressures were still 22 to 24 with timolol maleate. This is how the eye looked like, the new position of the tube. And you can see there was a gap between the cornea and the tube. So we could get rid of the tube endothelial touch. The bleb looked much better now. It was not that elevated and cystic. And there was sort of diffuse bleb around the body of the valve. After this procedure, over a period of time, this child did well. Last follow-up was November 2019. So you could see the right eye had a very decent course just with one surgery. He has been doing well all these years. However, the left eye, we had multiple interventions before we could control his pressures. So now his pressures range between 16 to 20 with timolol maleate. I am keeping my fingers crossed that it stays like that. So just to highlight certain risk factors which can cause this kind of a fibrotic capsule formation around the valve, that is initiated by the inflammatory reaction induced by the aqueous flow and then followed by the fibrodegenerative process. Now the surface roughness of the AGV also partly maybe contributed to that. There has been studies in the literature that support this. So aqueous suppression in the initial phase may help reduce this encapsulation, and the smoother valve implants may have lesser chances of fibrous growth, but I would not say the same in my experience. The capsule managed excision is considered an effective method if the valve has been working well initially. So after initial success, if we have a big capsule, it does help. The fibrotic capsule excision does help. However, use of mitomycin C or partial Tenon's excision at the time of primary procedure has not been proved very useful. So the points I would like to ponder here is that, are there any particular pointers to indicate the success of this capsular excision? Should the chances of reformation of capsule discourage this procedure over a second shunt? Should we attempt this, or we should directly go to the second shunt? And what is the ideal time and procedure to overcome the resistance due to this fibrotic capsule? Well, thank you for the kind attention. I would
thank you, Sushma. Can you place the last slide, the previous slide?
Right.
Yeah, I would like to have your previous slide on the screen. Yeah, so these are the 3 points to ponder, and very well presented and well managed case, Dr. Sushma. And I would like Dr. Pradeep Ramlulu's views and opinions regarding this failing bleb post tube and his inputs on this.
Yeah, I mean, I've only done a small number of these capsular excisions. I think this is probably a case where you might do it because I think it's a younger patient, and you really don't want to move on to a cyclodestructive procedure or a second shunt. I think you're really trying to avoid those. I think that I've not really been able to tell when it's going to be successful or not, and in fact, sometimes even the thickness over the bleb is not over the plate is not that indicative. It sounds like you were saying what I usually see is that, even you cut through a lot of these, of this capsular material, but then usually what I've seen is right immediately adjacent to the plate, there's a very thin but very dense layer. That's almost like plastic. And as soon as you cut through that, everything is going. the fluid starts flowing. So it seems like most of the resistance is not due to the thickness, but it's due to the density of that fibrous layer immediately around the plate. So I don't know that thickness of the capsule is even really that relevant. I have had a couple of successes in those 6 cases, and some of them are still working years out later. So I think it's worth trying. How do you prevent it from happening? I mean, I think there's work that shows that early aqueous suppression can derive lower eye pressures after Ahmed valve placement. So I think that's certainly something that we all ought to be doing, whether it would have stopped it in this case or not.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we know. So I think you did the right thing, and hopefully it stays. I think that I think in general, I've not been a big fan of cyclodestructive procedures in younger patients because I think they just don't work very well. But I think they do work okay in younger eyes that have had a prior tube shunt. So that is maybe the one exception. So I wouldn't feel too afraid to move on to like a supplementary diode laser if the pressure were to go higher.
Okay, Dr. Pradeep, thank you for your inputs.
Yeah, Professor Pandav, sir, can you offer your comments and inputs on this case, sir? What would you have done differently, sir?
Again, a very interesting and difficult case.
Am I audible, sir, Professor?
Periodic glaucoma as such. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir.
Periodic glaucoma as such is difficult, and especially when you have a situation like this. I have struggled with some of these patients with the tubes, and I do capsular excision sometimes, not very frequently. And I think as Dr. Ramulu said, we do see some IOP lowering, but there's no way actually to prevent it, happening in the future. Invariably, it comes back again. It may take a few months or sometime a couple of years, but it does come back again. The only good thing is that it does give you some time where you have control of IOP. I think this capsule is really very thick, and I think again I agree with Dr. Ramulu because the thickness of the capsule, to my mind, actually the thickness is a secondary phenomenon. The valve has already failed. The thickness happens because now the pressure is building up within that cavity, which is created around the space which is created around the plate, and because now the pressure is building up, the capsule reacts to that increased pressure and becomes thicker. The failure probably is related to some other factors, the biochemical factors, maybe because there are deposition of glucose aminoglycans and other extracellular matrix material into that space, which actually makes that capsule impermeable, and then the pressure goes up. So I think the keeping IOP low, there's evidence now, experimental as well as clinical evidence, that in the post-AGV or post-any tube surgery, particularly AGV, if you keep the IOP low by treating the prophylactically with anti-glaucoma medicines, maybe you can get a better success rate. So I think I would do essentially something similar to what is being done. I will remove this capsule, and some people use mitomycin C, at the time of capsule excision and expose that area to mitomycin C, but it doesn't seem to work as well over the implant as it works with the trabeculectomy. But that's one thing what we could try. But certainly I think we should get because there's a child, it has a long way to go. And the problem with the tubes is that in children, they tend to migrate a little bit anterior towards the cornea and then lead to corneal endothelium. So I think it is rightly done that the tube, the lens is out, now we have more space there, and probably you can position this cornea more posterior, more away from this tube away from the cornea. So that will be helpful in the long run. But essentially, I think this is the way to go, and we need to monitor his pressure. And sometime if it doesn't work, then you might have to put in the tube somewhere, inferiorly. So we like to avoid cyclodestruction as far as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Pandav, for your inputs. Dr. Venkatesh, what is your take-home message for this particular case? And also would request you to give some inputs on how to manage a failing bleb to all our general ophthalmologists.
Yeah. So there are two problems which Sushma had in this patient. One was the endothelial touch, which was managed. Luckily, many of the times when you have this problem, you don't have a long enough tube to reinsert. So you may have to even use tube extenders. So there's one small tip I would like to share. So whenever you're doing a tube surgery, it'll be nice to do a little away from where your implant is, no? So that you have a kind of an S bend for your tube. So you do an eccentric entry. So there is a longer version available in case if you want to do a future trimming of the tube and entry again straight inside, like a second surgery in case if you have to do it like how they had to do this in this particular case. So that's one important tip I would share. But again, keeping it away from endothelium is very critical. Where you enter with your 23 gauge needle is very important. The second thing is a point to ponder around this tenons, especially the use of mitomycin. It's kind of debated because it induces tissue death and stimulates a reactive fibrosis. And that's the reason why it really fails in younger patients, especially who are very young. Invariably, they get this tenon cyst, almost 1/3 of patients. So it was very nicely managed, but I don't know what are the pointers to indicate the success for excision, especially in younger children like this. But definitely, I think we should consider excision once before we go for another implant. So another implant is another option available, especially if your inferior quadrant is free. I would prefer to go to the inferior quadrant and put another implant if the excision fails. But excision would be the first way to go and see how it works. Mitomycin definitely I will not use as a primary or even in a later procedure. But reducing the aqueous is a factor which many of them talk about now, either by giving anti-glaucoma medications post tube insertion, and also some people ligate the tube even in an AGV, but this may affect the functioning of the valve. But some people strongly advocate they ligate like how you do in a tube, the AGV valve also. And for some time, if you can not allow the aqueous over the plate, they can prevent cyst for a long term. So these are some of my observations and tips for people who are seeing.
Can you give some tips on how do you manage a failing bleb, whether it's a post-trab or post-tube? General principles.
Yeah, generally, I think it's very important to I always say a trab is only half well crossed. So you have to cross the other half. You have to do meticulous follow-up of these patients. Unfortunately, period like this you can't do, but normally every couple of weeks it's good to see them and try manipulating the bleb from the beginning, either in the form of massaging or sutural lysis. If all this done at the right time with the right procedure, most of the blebs can be salvaged. In spite of that, some blebs can go for failure. Then you have to do maybe a bleb needling with antimetabolites. Mainly 5-FU has been very useful in some of these cases. But you need to closely follow these patients, repeat the injections, and make sure you can revive the bleb. But always, we have to always revisit whether we need to again do an intraoperative revision. Also works after a certain period of time. It's good not to delay that for a longer period. So revisions internally, there are brilliant ways of going internally and doing a revision like what we have learned from Davinder Grover. And some of these failing blebs also work very well. And we have to look for those eyes which really fail, mainly pseudoexfoliation glaucomas, eyes which are on chronic medical therapy. These are eyes which we have to critically categorize as high-risk patients for failure and closely watch them and do some of these manipulations.
Thank you, Dr. Venkatesh. Thank you, Dr. Sushma, for presenting such a wonderful case. We had a very good discussion on this case. And now I come to the end of this webinar. Every good thing has to come to an end. So thank all our international speakers, Dr. David Friedman, Dr. Pradeep Ramlulu, and our panelists, Dr. Vijaya, Dr. Devendra Sood, Dr. Chandrima Paul, Dr. S.S. Pandav, Dr. Venkatesh, and Dr. Sirisha Senthil, along with our esteemed speakers. Without these cases, this webinar would not have been successful. So I thank our speakers, Dr. Neetu Mohan, Dr. Smita Panda, Dr. Manish Singh, Dr. Sushma, Dr. Digvijay, and Dr. Narottama Sindhu. Once again, I thank a lot on behalf of Scientific Committee. Invite our Chairman Scientific Committee, Dr. Partha Biswas, to give his remark, and followed by him by Dr. Jatindra Bhalla, my co-moderator, who has really helped me a lot in framing up this whole session. And just to put a small remark, this webinar wouldn't have been possible without the input of Dr. Venkatesh, who really played a key role in getting the two international speakers on board for this particular program. Thanks a lot, Dr. Venkatesh, for getting these two international speakers. Over to you, Dr. Partha.
Yeah, I think it would be better first. So Balla, you first, pehle aap.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being so considerate. I know chairman has to give the final remarks, sir. So I'll begin by thanking our president, Professor Mahipal Sachdev, President AIOS, Professor Namrata Sharma, Secretary, for the opportunity to our dynamic chairman, Scientific Committee, Dr. Partha Biswas, for conceptualizing this program of glaucoma case files. And I would like to thank our Dream National Faculty of Glaucoma Stalwarts, Dr. L. Vijaya, Dr. Devinder Sood, President GSI, Professor Pandav, Dr. Venkatesh, and Dr. Sirisha Senthil. Their high quality discussion, tips, and inputs on the wonderful cases have really added immense value to the academics. Sincerely thankful for their illuminating presence, and the cases presented by all the speakers were top notch and represented wide spectrum of glaucoma conundrum and displayed high professional workup of those cases. Encouragement and motivation from all my scientific committee colleagues was abstract but fulsome. They nudged us to do our very best, and I have no words for praise of my co-moderator, Dr. Amit Porwal, who is really this thing helped me, and we together could work as a team. Success of webinar is gauged by the attendees and delegates, and their sheer presence in large number and so much strength on a Sunday evening has really filled our heart with emotions and gratitude. And now I'll pass on to Dr. Partha Biswas for giving us the final comments.
The final comments is just to thank the two of you, Jatinder as well as Amit, for actually designing the whole program, making it so vibrant, making it so nice that even people like me, non-glaucoma specialists, did enjoy the program. I have to thank again on behalf of AIOS Scientific Committee, every one of you who have been viewing us. We have been viewing this wonderful program, and we have all learned a lot from the program thanks to our faculty, right? The international faculty, our national faculty, and our presenters who have done a wonderful job, and that also spared their Sunday evening with us. Very important is to thank our backend team, our secretarial staff at the AIOS headquarters, Kripal, Mr. Sunil, and Pallavi, of course, and the whole gang actually who have supported us, who have made it possible, the small things that were very important to make the program come in place. So thank you one and all. Thanks a lot, and have a very good evening, and all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Well done.
Thank you all, ma'am.
Thank you.
Apologize for any audio glitches which were there from my end.
Is
really sorry
Pandav
for
around? I think there is
Yeah.
one question to Pandav. I
Yeah.
hope we could answer that. Pandav, I think there was one specific question to you.
Oh, which one?
Is UBM necessary before? I think
Yeah,
Sirisha has answered.
Yeah, I was
that.
trying to answer it. I think it's somewhat.
Yeah, maybe you can just
I messed up with
say
the-
it orally.
Yeah, I think UVM is not required before you, before you do the excision, because clinically you can. There's a thick capsule there, and there's a kind of is ballooning of the capsule is there, and you have high pressure. So UVM technically is not required, but if you can do it, you are more sure. It helps. It builds up the confidence. And I think the other associated question was that should we do it for hypertensive phase? Or during hypertensive or immediately after hypertensive phase. There was something like that in the question. I think that should be avoided because hypertensive phase is temporary, and if you persist with the medical therapy, just keep the IUP low. What happens is that initially after you put the implant, there's a reaction, there's a inflammation, there's a wound heal happening, but eventually it will go into a remodulation phase. So this capsule, even if it is thick in the beginning, it can remodule and it can become more permeable and even thinner, later on. So I think you have to wait, for a few months before you take a decision to excise this capsule. And the other thing is that as long as the capsule is vascular, if you can see there's a if you see it carefully, you'll see there's a vessel that is pinkish, fleshy kind of a look. Avoid touching those capsules because they're still actively inflamed. And if you touch that, is going to come back very quickly again. So let that subside, let it become a little more pale and fibrous type before you remove it.
This is the best part of our glaucoma people. Even though the time is dealing, we do answer all the questions. We tried our best to answer all the questions, and with having expert panel like Dr. Vijay, Dr. Pandav, and all others, all
Yes.
questions were answered, and there's no doubt that we have left any questions.
Just
Thank you.
Amit, just one question. One more question is there. I think we should finish off that also. What is the role of Rho kinase inhibitors in secondary glaucoma? To any of the panelists, if they could take up this question.
I think Rho kinase inhibitors that can be used in secondary glaucoma because the advantage is that they also have some anti-inflammatory property, actually, the Rho kinase inhibitors, as opposed to prostaglandins, which are pro-inflammatory. So they have an advantage and they can be used in secondary glaucomas, including the associated with inflammation. So I think then it depends on the availability, what Rho kinase is available to you, and how efficacy would be. So, but the short answer to your question is that they can be used.
Thank you, everybody. Any more questions? So we end of this program now.
I think I'm just answering replying the question.
Yeah.
I think that's
Okay, ma'am.
No, but a big thank you to you, Dr. Amit, and to you, Dr. Bhalla, for for doing this and being this.
Yeah, I think Dr. Vijay wants to answer this question.
Yeah, finish. I just tried it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you all for having me. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
nice to
everyone.
see you people. That is more than anything else.
No, really wonderful to have all of you, ma'am. I think it's a team of dream panelists. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.